then I'll walk you through how to share your screen again.
Good.
Okay, everybody, welcome on behalf of Holocaust Museum Los Angeles. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. This morning, I'm pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Henry Slucki, a Holocaust survivor from France. For those of you who have not been to the museum before, Holocaust Museum Los Angeles is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust, and this memorial became Holocaust Museum Los Angeles. These survivors who established our museum did so with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that our museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward their mission. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Henry Slucki, who will share his story with you, and afterwards you can type in your questions and he'll answer as many as possible. Henry is a frequent speaker at our museum, and he's been participating in our education programs for years, and it's my honor to welcome you to this discussion. Henry, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So if you go to share screen.
Oh, share screen. Whoop. Oh, I can't. Where's the share screen?
If you scroll a little bit right now, you can see, if you use the mouse a little bit, you should be on the bottom. It says it's a green arrow towards the bottom center.
No, let me go back. I've got slideshow on.
Okay, so Henry, go back to the video where you see your face.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. There it is. Now I say share screen.
Okay.
Yes. Now click your PowerPoint.
Whoop, PowerPoint here. Okay. Whoops. It's not happening.
This is just the music slide, so maybe go to the next slide.
Oh dear, what's happening? I can't.
I think it, Henry, if you click on the right arrow on your keyboard.
Right keyboard, right arrow where? Whoops.
On your keyboard.
On my keyboard. Oh, yes. Right arrow. Okay. Nothing's happening. Should I hit the right arrow up above there where it says click forward?
Yes.
It says join a new meeting. No. Oh dear.
No, okay, it's okay. Go back to your PowerPoint now.
Go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, there.
Go back to your PowerPoint. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now advance it.
Now hit, whoops, hit from the beginning. Here we go. Whoops. Yes. Now it says leave and join new meeting.
No. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, if you get out of Zoom and go back to your PowerPoint, just
okay. Yeah, there I am.
If you can, okay. As long as you're on your PowerPoint now, you should be able to control it.
Okay, but I've got to go from beginning. Okay, here we go. And now, oh, now I hit the arrow up, down. No.
Yep.
None of the arrows work.
Oh, okay, Henry, you're controlling it now. We can see your slides.
But it's not advancing.
Oh.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you so much, Henry.
Yes, we are ready. I'm I'm trying to get the, okay, ready?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Michael. It's my privilege to present my story. We began by listening to some music, and the question is, what was the music and why? Was it just a entertainment? No, it was Joseph Haydn's Emperor Quartet, second movement, which then in 1841 had a poem attached to it, the Song of the German People. And it was Germany's national anthem and still is. Deutschland über alles in der Welt since 1922. Now, why am I saying this? Why are we playing this? Simply because is it that are we currently re-experiencing the world of 1933 when the Third Reich came into being? Or perhaps 1930, some years earlier, when there was still time to prevent that from happening? Or perhaps 1924, when Hitler's power started? Well, it's all of those. Obviously, we need to look at history when considering what's happening nowadays. So part of it is my story, that's history. Part of it is the lesson or lessons that we must learn from those experiences. Okay, my name is Henry Slucki, pronounced like the word look. My wife always emphasizes that it's got the word luck in it, and I certainly would not reject that. I'm a husband, a father, a grandfather, retired professor from the University of Southern California, School of Medicine, teaching behavioral science in the Department of Psychiatry. I dedicate my presentation to the millions who perished during the Holocaust, victims of fascism, including my very own close relatives here on my maternal side, my grandparents, whom I never knew, along with cousins and aunts and uncles. And on my father's side, close relatives. And many, many more, as we say, more distant relatives. And I also dedicate my presentation to our courageous rescuers who saved us from sure death. I always emphasize that if it had not been for rescuers, none of us would have survived. No one was able to do it alone. And I also dedicate my presentation to you, our witnesses to the past and builders of a better and more beautiful world. As survivors, we must tell our stories while we can. And as witnesses, you must help keep the memory alive and prevent more Holocausts from occurring. So far, on that count, we're not doing very well. Every day, somewhere in the world, there is genocide taking place, brutality against innocent people. We must actively defend democratic principles. We must be vigilant at all times and protect everyone from tyrants, demagogues, and oppressors. In the face of fascism, there is no such thing as being neutral. And the main lesson that we must have learned, and I will keep emphasizing this in my presentation, that never again to anyone, anywhere. Democracy is not a spectator sport, as one of our political commentators says every day now. But we have another reason to tell our stories. Recent developments within the last several decades have come from groups of individuals who deny that the Holocaust ever took place. And here we see a caricature of a man wearing a cap with a Star of David, obviously a Jew, with a long Pinocchio nose. And the statement is, the Holocaust is a great lie.
Henry,
These
I'm
are
so
very
sorry to
dangerous.
interject. Henry, I'm
Yes.
so sorry to interject, but your slides are not advancing. Are you seeing them on your end?
Oh, yes. But they're not filling up the whole screen. Let me.
But I think
Whoops.
you know what? I realize I believe you might be sharing the wrong screen sharing the wrong. Do you have your presentation open twice? Because we're still on the first slide right now here.
Oh dear. No. Let me. Oh dear. If
Okay,
I
yeah,
go,
it's okay.
if I go here,
we can talk you through it.
I can't seem to get the no, it's still not taking up the full screen. Is there a
But what, Henry, if you go back to share screen.
yeah, back to share screen? Uh-oh, how do
Yeah,
I?
remember on the bottom center.
Okay, share screen, yes. Let me move. Here we go. Yeah, share screen. How's that?
Okay, now what do you see?
I see a screen. Should I click on screen for my PowerPoint?
Do you see the PowerPoint that's already that you've been looking at? I know what they're kind of
I see
small
screen. I
icons.
see screen one, but no.
Well, do you
Oh dear.
see one that has your PowerPoint that's maybe a couple of slides in already? The one with the caricature?
No, let's see. Let me go back over here. Should I hit share screen now?
Yeah, if you hit share screen, and then you want to, then it gives you a couple of different things to share, and you're going to want to click on the one on your PowerPoint and then go to your PowerPoint and you can control it from there.
Okay, wait. Let's back up. Go back to screen one. Is that what you're saying?
If you go to one of the ones that's your PowerPoint.
I can't. Let me see what this one is. I can't seem to. Oh dear.
It's okay. It's okay. It happens. If you click on share screen.
Share screen. I can't seem to select.
But you might, if you double click or click on your PowerPoint.
I've got advanced.
And then, no, it should be on basic.
Okay, I'm on basic.
Now, do you see a small icon of your PowerPoint?
No. Does that mean I'm not on? I don't have it on?
Because earlier we had the first slide.
Here, let me see what I've got here. I can't seem. Oh dear, I'm sorry, this is not working out. Here we go. PowerPoint. Okay, here's PowerPoint. And here we go. There. Is that what you want?
Okay, are you looking at your PowerPoint now?
Yeah.
Okay, now go back to Zoom and but don't, okay, keep that up. Don't close out of PowerPoint. Now, if you go back onto Zoom, it should work now to share your screen.
Go back to, and I leave my PowerPoint where it is.
Leave PowerPoint where it is, and then go to Zoom, and then go back to share screen.
Shared screen, okay.
You should
Except,
see it now, hopefully.
no, it's not happening. Oh dear. Share. Is that helping?
Yep. Yes, yes. Now go to yes. Go click on from beginning.
Okay. Ah,
No, okay. Oh, actually, okay. If you, that should work. Now
yeah.
go, yes. And
Okay.
then you can keep advancing.
Okay, I'll advance.
Yes,
You heard
okay.
my comments and my
Yes.
introduction. Are you seeing it now?
Okay.
Good.
We see it now,
Okay,
Henry.
good,
Yes,
good,
thank
good.
you so
Thank
much.
you. Okay, so I'm dedicated with my presentation, and as survivors, we must tell our stories, and as witnesses, you must help keep the memory alive and prevent more Holocausts. And we are now moving on to democracy is not a spectator sport. Okay, now where we were with the Holocaust deniers making things very difficult and absolutely necessary for us to emphasize our stories. Here is a photograph which is very significant with the quote from Martin Luther King, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And as you see, these are people with disabilities. This is very important because the genocide began with people with disabilities. Hitler referred to them as useless eaters. And in the light of these kinds of comments, we cannot just be sitting still and letting things happen. All right, I'm an academician, so I always begin with a definition of who is a Holocaust survivor. And this comes from the main museum in Washington, D.C., Museum of the Holocaust and Martyrs Memorial. It's a person, Jewish or non-Jewish, who was displaced, persecuted, or discriminated against due to racial, religious, ethnic, social, or political policies of the Nazis and their collaborators between 1933 and 1945. So that's only part of the definition, but let's focus on that for a moment. It's anyone who is a victim of discrimination by the Third Reich, but it also includes, it also includes a former inmate of a concentration or extermination camp, ghetto, or prison, or a refugee, or a person in hiding. That last phrase, it applies to me. I was not an inmate of a concentration camp or an extermination camp or a ghetto or a prison, but I was a refugee and a person in hiding. Some guiding principles among Holocaust survivors. There is no typical survivor. Each experience was individually unique, as everybody else's stories are. We could live in the same city, but have very, very different experiences. There is no metric. We agree there is no metric, no way of measuring the degree of distress or suffering that any individual has experienced. And finally, we agree that the impact on a survivor's subsequent lifestyle is going to vary from individual to individual. Okay, my story. I was born in Paris, France on July 12th, 1934. When I was a child, this is what Paris looked like. People dancing in the streets, banners and flags, a lot of celebration, which I thought was being done for my birthday on July 12th. But it was, of course, in preparation for the 14th of July, the National Day of Patriotism in France. Flags were out on the streets, and here I thought that they were doing it for me. Here's my only baby picture. Here I am at 7 months of age. You can see it is winter. I'm all bundled up. This is my street, which was really not a regular street. It was a dead-end alley. The pavement was not as nice as it is nowadays. There were no trees or bushes lining the sidewalks. And when you drove in, you had to back out because it was a very narrow, this barely would fit a car. Here's a picture of me at the age of 2.5. I'm riding my Irish mailer, which is a tricycle in which you advance by rowing on the bars, the L-shaped bars that I'm holding, and you guide it by your feet. But otherwise, it is a standard tricycle. By the way, you can purchase Irish mailers. Go to the web and you'll find one. This is the metro station, which during the war was our air raid shelter at Faubourg Saint-Ambroise. This picture was taken, as the other we just saw, in 2013. I'll have more to say about that later. But here I am standing where in 1939 we would run and hide when the alarm was sounded. One of my favorite pre-war pictures is that of the Paris bus, in which you entered and exited on the rear on a platform, open air platform. It was a rather small bus, but I used to love riding that bus. Some pre-war rumbling in Europe, just to bring in history here. 1933, Hitler comes to power in Germany. I want you to take a good look at this slide. This is a rally that took place in northwestern Germany in 1934, between two hills way off in the distance, and you could see banners and flags as far as the eye can see, and people. The estimate size of the crowd was 750,000. So I emphasize that he was not a lone nut. He had a following. His ideology took root in certainly by 1934. The national anthem, as we played at the beginning, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in der Welt, Germany, Germany above all in the world. The symbol of the swastika was also found on the belt buckle of every soldier, along with the German eagle. And that was surrounded by the words in German, God is with us. If God is with us, we can't possibly be wrong. In 1936, the rest of Europe is beginning to respond actively. In France, the United Front is founded by all the parties from center to left as anti-fascist. In Spain in 1936, Franco and 3 other generals of the Spanish army actively overthrow the democratically elected government of Spain. And we have as the icon of that war Pablo Picasso's painting of Guernica, Guernica being a small town in northern Spain, right at the foot of the Pyrenees Mountains, that was bombed by German and Italian airplanes to help Franco come to power, and it's become the symbol of war, of brutality, of suffering, people, mothers and children, burning buildings. The bull in the upper left-hand corner is a symbol of the Spanish people. In 1938, the United Front is defeated in France. But they had elected at that point a socialist prime minister, Leon Blum, who created many social programs that were copied by other countries throughout the world for medicine and unemployment compensation and other benefits to the general populace. My aunt and uncle leave France and they go to Mexico. That is of personal importance, but especially important was that they secure for my parents and me entry visas to go to Mexico. So from 1930, actually 1936 on, we had permissions to enter Mexico, but as most of us today, we did not see any real reason to emigrate. After all, France was our country, and we resided there and remained there totally satisfied, at least for the time being. I went to school. This is my first school. Right now, it's right next door to the Centre Pompidou, the art museum, where the people are seated. Used to be dirt, and that was our schoolyard. The brick building is my old school, and I remember it well. In 1939, my father volunteers for the French Foreign Legion. That is, he volunteered for the French Army, but as a foreigner, he could not get into the regular army, and they formed several battalions of the French Foreign Legion made up of aliens living in France. My parents and I take a last minute picture in 1939. I was, of course, very sad to see him go, but I was assured that he was leaving us for just a very brief time, that he would return, which was, of course, a hope, which turned out to be correct. That is, he did survive the fighting on the front. He was a part of a regiment of foreign volunteers made up of Eastern European Jews who had left Eastern Europe and come to France, and Spanish Republicans who, that is, those who supported the Republic and fought against Franco and were now in exile from Franco. Here's a photograph. Here's my father at the lower left-hand side of the front row with some of his buddies. As you can see, no two uniforms are alike. Hats are different, boots are different, shirts, jackets are all, that was the best that the French army could do against, of course, a very powerful German army, which eventually occupied Paris on June 14th, 1940. My mother and I, my aunts and my cousins, we were all on the sidewalk watching the army marching in. They occupied not just Paris, but northern and western France along the Atlantic. And here is a map of what France looked like. This is an error. It's really from 1940 until 1942 when they occupied the rest of France. But all the parts that are in color are under occupation. The non-colored, the white section of the map is the unoccupied France. There's Vichy as the capital of the puppet government that was established by the German army. And my mother and I then joined my father, who was demobilized on June 16th in southern France. And my mother and I escape Paris by taking the train and joining him in a small town in southern France. Here's the old time railways that I used to really enjoy traveling in, the individualized compartments were very common in third class. This is the railroad station that we, in the town we arrived at in Montauban, which is right here in southwestern France, not far from Toulouse, and not far from the Spanish border. We arrived there at the end of June, June 28th, 1940. The town is a beautiful town. It's got the Tarn River running right through it. The museum is in this building, the Art Museum of the town, named after one of the artists that was a painter that was born in Montauban. And it turns out of interest that I came up with discovered recently, in the basement of this building during the war, hidden, wrapped up and hidden in the basement was the Mona Lisa. So Mona Lisa and I were neighbors for at least a couple of years that we lived in Montauban. Here's another view of it. Our house is just below this slide right along the river. It's a beautiful town, very much Huguenot influenced, Protestants who had escaped from northern France to be free of the Catholic Church that ruled the northern part. In this next slide, we see a picture of our house with a white door. This is our house, taken again in 2013. My bedroom is right above the front door, and my folks' bedroom is to the side. More about that shortly. And then for the next 2 years, we lived what we considered a normal family life. That is, you really would not have known that there was a war going on. We were in an agricultural area, and food was certainly plentiful, and there were no German soldiers here. Everything went well until the 6 o'clock in the morning on August 26th in 1942, when there was a knock on our door. It was the French police that came to arrest us as part of a national roundup to deport all Jews from France. We did not answer the door. My folks came, they woke up right away. They knew who was knocking on the door. They ran into my bedroom, woke me up very quietly, and told me as an 8-year-old, let's pretend nobody is home. Let's play the let's pretend game. And every few minutes in the dark, they would whisper to me what a great job I'm doing playing the pretend game. The gendarme kept knocking on the door for an hour and a half. Did they not knock down the door? Simply because their orders were to round up people who came and answered the door. And finally, at 7:30, they went back to their headquarters without us. Incidentally, only about 7,000 Jews were rounded up on that day throughout France. I say only because that's 7,000 out of 30 to 40,000 foreign-born Jews that they were seeking to round up. So other people were also doing the same thing we were, and that is not answering the door. And then, as we were for the next 2 weeks, hidden by our landlords, the Kaden family, on their farm just on the outskirts of town. They helped us get the needed legal documents that we needed to survive. And from that point on, from August, September of 1942 on, life goes back to so-called normal until November 11th, when the German army occupies all of France. So now all of France is occupied by the Germans. And again, here's Montauban in southwestern France, very close to the Spanish border. At that point, and my parents had been friends with the Spanish refugees living in Montauban, well into the hundreds of thousands in all France. And we sell all of our possessions. My parents had sewing machines and things as tailors, as workers in the clothing industry. And we hire 3 Spanish refugees as guides, who years earlier had come from Spain across the Pyrenees into France. Now they were guiding us in escaping from France to Spain on November 25th of 1942. And we crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain on foot. Took 5 nights. We did it only at night to avoid the French and the Spanish border guards. I should point out that the Germans had just arrived at the border, so they were not quite organized yet in securing the borders, and we were able to cross over the mountains, avoiding the real treacherous areas, thanks to our guides, and snow-covered areas. And so, in addition to being a Holocaust survivor, I am also an illegal alien. Not my words, that's why they're in quotes. No one is illegal, obviously. We escape to Barcelona, Spain, which becomes our new home. It's a great city. The Ramblas, for example, the main boulevard, was right just about 3 blocks from where we ended up living. Here's a postcard from the 1920s, pretty much what I remember the Ramblas looking like in 1942, 43, when we lived there. Plaza de Catalunya, again, pretty much the same today as it was then, except that nowadays there are a lot of modern tall buildings around the plaza. And as you can see, Barcelona is very much laid out like Los Angeles, the ocean on one side and hills on the other, like in Los Angeles, separating the main city from the valley area neighborhoods. In Barcelona, the Spanish people are great people. They love to sing and dance flamenco. They themselves had been victims of a fascist government Here is a photograph of Hitler and Franco, partners in crime at that beginning in earlier, right after the Spanish Civil War. I am enrolled in the French school. Again, this picture taken in 2013, but it looks pretty much today like it did when I lived there, when I attended the school. Bermuda Conference took place in that spring in April of 1943, in which the regarding the refugee policies of the United States and the United Kingdom. And the conclusion, the results of that conference was no change in policies. And so Jews would not be readily admitted into the United States as a special policy change. My hero, Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady, married to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, was extremely upset about what had happened. And she criticized the government of the United States and Britain and came up with a proposal modeled on the Kindertransport that earlier had saved many, many Jewish children from Germany and Austria, having gone to England. In this case, the American Joint Distribution Committee and the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society came up with a plan and implemented a plan that Eleanor Roosevelt sponsored, in which about, I don't know, 150 children came to the United States. My parents signed me up to come to the United States with that group of children. The first transport was in May of 1943. My name was on the list. At the last minute, my parents took my name off. They could not see letting me go, our being separated. The second convoy came to the United States from Barcelona in July. And again, my name was on the list. And again, my name was removed at the last minute. And finally, in September, the last group was to come to the United States. My name was put on the list, and this time it remained on there. I said a final goodbye to my parents at the main train station in Barcelona, which today looks pretty much the way it did then. And we're crying. My parents are out on the platform, and I in the train compartment, along with the other 9 children in our group. There were 10 of us total, ages 3 to 15. And we go from Barcelona to Madrid, and from Madrid to Lisbon. Here we are in Lisbon on September 22nd, 1943. This was a photograph in the newspaper, the most popular newspaper of the day. And there's a similar photograph in the archives of the Joint Distribution Committee in New York City. I'm the kid right here in the center with a suit and a tie. And there are 10 of us there. The 2 little guys to my left, the one immediately to my left, Peter, lives in Milwaukee today with his family. And to his left is his younger brother. Peter was at that time 6 years old. To his left is George, who was 3. George passed away a couple of years ago, lived in Baltimore. And Claude over here on the right of me lives in France near the Swiss border, and I'm in touch with him as well. There's a close-up. The ship we took was the Serpa Pinto, a Portuguese ship, a neutral ship. And here is the manifest of passengers. My name is the very last one, last line on the bottom of the page. And as you see, the word refugee is superimposed on the names here. Those are the 10 of us. We were refugees and categorized that way. In 2001, the era of the computer, I Googled something that I remembered had taken place. There was a naval battle that was right directly in front of our path to the United States. So I Googled naval battle, North Atlantic, October of 1943. I was not sure exactly what the date was, but this is what came up. A map with a little mark right in the middle of the ocean, just above the Azores. and that was where we were. Here's a Navy report. There was a naval battle. 2 U-boats were sunk. 2 German submarines were sunk on the 4th of October at this exact location. And this is what happened to them. And here's who did it. American and British fighter planes torpedoed the German U-boats or submarines. In the Azores, we ate pineapples. There's apparently pineapples growing in the North Atlantic in the San Miguel Island in the Azores. We saw these huge flying fish, and we hit some pretty big storms because, of course, September, October is smack in the middle of hurricane season. We arrived in Philadelphia on Wednesday, October 13th, 1943. So I just had an anniversary. And we dock at the foot of the Delaware River Bridge, which is now called the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. At that time, the only bridge crossing the Delaware. And this is one of those archival photographs. We docked right here at the foot of the bridge. Then late that afternoon, we arrived around noon. We docked around noon. Late that afternoon, we go by train to Newark, New Jersey, and then by cab to the Hebrew Orphan Asylum and Shelter Home, a building that I remember well, but no longer exists. It was destroyed. And we lived there for a couple of weeks, next 10 days or so. We sleep in dorm style rooms, 5 boys in one, 5 girls in the other. We eat in the large dining room. In fact, our first breakfast the next day after we arrived, we are ushered into the dining hall, and there's a table for 10 with bowl and a spoon in front of each chair. And we are seated, and there's some cardboard boxes in the middle of the table with pitchers of milk. We had no idea what we were supposed to do. We looked around and saw the other kids in this orphanage putting things out of that, sprinkling things out of the boxes. Turned out to be dry cereal, and the milk in the pitchers we added into our bowls, and that was our first breakfast. So we became Americanized almost immediately. We were all in quarantine, given physical examinations and lots of shots, as I remember. And following that, we were put in Jewish homes throughout the United States by foster care agency. Some the two boys, George and Peter, going all the way to San Francisco in a foster care home. I was very fortunate. I believe I was the only one that had relatives that came forward. My great aunt and great uncle, my grandfather's brother, lived in an apartment in New York City's Washington Heights, and I went to live with them. My parents had been in touch with them by mail, and they had agreed to take care of me. So here's an old vintage photograph of the George Washington Bridge along with the Hudson River and all the greenery that is long gone. It has a second deck on the bridge, and of course, lots of buildings and roads. I came to America as a 9-year-old speaking French and Spanish and no English. My great uncle and great aunt spoke English and Yiddish, but no French and no Spanish. So our first few days were quite difficult. Total immersion means we were pointing to things. They would point to something and then they would say the word in English, and I would point to it and then say the word after them. And that's the way I learned my English. In school, I was enrolled in school that very next week. Everything was in English. No one spoke French or Spanish. Kids on the block, English only. The neighborhood stores, English only. The movies, English only. I did listen to the radio, and here we have what was popular at the time by Mir Bistushane, not English, Yiddish, but still foreign to me. Chicory Chick, another popular song. Can't learn English from that. Accentuate the positive sounded like it was a foreign language. And Merzidot, figure that one out. Look it up on Google. Merzidot. Not the way we really should pronounce it, but okay. I listened to the radio and discovered a Spanish station. Everything was in Spanish and they played Latin music. So I was able to hear things that were familiar to me, like Besame Mucho, popular both in Europe and in the United States. At school, they put me in the second grade, even though I was 9. I was always very, very short for my age. So I fit in very well in the second grade. It really, I really looked like a 6-year-old, even though I was 9. I would learn English much more easily in the second grade. Arithmetic was really easy. In Europe, I had been doing trigonometry as all the other kids had been doing. So we had no problem there, but English was a big problem. Had the Dick and Jane books, fun with Dick and Jane, beginning with a few words that keep being repeated and then gets a little longer and longer. Public library card came in handy, and so did the funnies that I would read every day. Went to the movies at least once a week and sometimes twice. By the end of 2 weeks, I was able to carry on a reasonable conversation in English. I remember my cousin meeting a friend of hers at the 5 and 10 and introducing me. And the friend asked me how long had I lived in the United States. And I answered at that time, I remember clearly saying 2 weeks. So that's not unreasonable. At home, My aunt and uncle spoke Yiddish. I went to a Yiddish school after hours, after regular school. Uh, I became Americanized very quickly. My name was changed in spelling. Um, my aunt and uncle had very few records, but they did have this collection by Paul Robeson, Ballad for Americans by Earl Robinson and John Latouche. And I learned my American history from Ballad for Americans. Okay, what about my parents? I had left them in Barcelona, and in 1944, in the spring of 44, shortly after I left them, my parents applied for Spanish exit visas to go to Mexico, where they had an entry visa. Um, you remember my aunt and uncle had emigrated to Mexico back in the late 30s. Well, my parents are refused entry into Mexico because at the time of the Spanish Civil War, there were only two countries in the world that supported the democratically elected government of Spain that Franco was attacking and overthrew. One was the Soviet Union, and the other country was Mexico. So one of the first things Franco did when he took power in Spain was to break off relations with both the Soviet Union and with Mexico. So when my parents asked for exit visas from Spain to go to Mexico, Franco government refused them. So the Joint Distribution Committee in the Hayas helped them by getting Cuban transit visas, meaning as far as Spain was concerned, my parents were going from Spain to Cuba. As far as the Cuban government was concerned, my parents were not going to stay there. They were just going through on their way to Mexico, and they had entry visas for Mexico. So everybody agreed, and my parents then left Spain and they go to Cuba. They get to Cuba only to discover that now it's 1944, it's 6 years after they received the visas, that their Mexican visas have expired. So they're stranded in Havana, but at least it's on this side of the ocean, and so they are safe. They request to come to the United States, and I appear before a committee in Washington, D.C. I remember being in a room, relatively large room, with a tribunal of maybe some dozen people behind a counter, sitting, asking me questions. I'm sitting in a chair by myself in the middle of the room, and turned me they turned down the request for my parents to come to the United States, hinging primarily on the question whether my father had been demobilized from the French army or whether he had deserted the French army, as many people had done at the end of that so-called false war. Um, he had been demobilized. He had his papers, but I wasn't able to produce them when I went to Washington, and so they were denied. In 1946, a year after the war was over, I again appear before a committee in Washington, D.C., and once again, they this time they approve it, and we are reunited in New York City on April 20th, 1946. Incidentally, April 20th being the birthday of Adolf Hitler, who had, of course, died a year earlier. Our new home in the United States is in Brooklyn, New York. from 1946 to 1949. And then we moved to Los Angeles, California in June 1949. So in addition to being a Holocaust survivor and being illegal alien, we're also 49ers. My education, I graduate from high school in Los Angeles. Then I go on to UCLA and get my bachelor's in 1955. Go on to Columbia University, get my master's in 1956. Then come back to UCLA for my PhD in 1960. In 1959, August 2nd, Carol and I are married. And here's a photograph of us at our wedding, my parents, my wife, and myself. We have two children, Michelle Deborah and Daniel Mark. We now have two granddaughters, Jenna Brielle, who this last year, received her master's degree in communication and journalism from the Annenberg School of Communication at USC, and Lauren Brooke, who graduated from Tulane University last year with all kinds of honors, and is now a PhD candidate at the University of Washington in Seattle in behavioral science and education. My immediate family in June 2008 are here. There I am. My wife is next to me, that's Carol, and then Michelle, our daughter, and her two daughters, Lauren, let me back up, Lauren and Jenna, and then my daughter-in-law, Stacy, and our son, Danny. Now we come to 2013, where that photograph was taken often. Photographs of France and Spain. Carol and I take our children on what I call the pilgrimage tour, going everywhere that I had lived. Here I am with my progeny, my son, my daughter, and two granddaughters in front of our apartment in Paris. Carol, my wife, joins me here, and our daughter-in-law, Stacy, and our son-in-law, Bruce, join us again in front of our apartment. Here we are in front of our house in Montauban, the one that's over my shoulder with the white door. And I'm saying to them, if that door had been opened in August of 1942, none of us would have survived. Pretty heavy, pretty heavy. Pierrette and Louis Cadenne were honored by Yad Vashem at the Paris and the Paris Holocaust Museum as righteous among nations. And here in 1991, and here are their names, Louis Cadenne, Pierrette Cadenne, as they deservedly earned that title as righteous among nations. They saved a lot of Jews, not just us. I always like to include in my remarks my cousin Charles Volmark, who was an officer in the French army of the resistance. From 1942 on, he was a lieutenant and was captured, tortured, and killed on the 30th of July, 1944, a very short time before the liberation of France in Charnex, a small village near Grenoble. The French government now admits its role as a collaborator with the Nazi occupant during the Holocaust, as the new plaques in French schools now indicate. And here is the translation in which they do say that it was the Vichy government police that arrested more than 11,000 children who were deported. And then every school has this plaque with the number of children who attended the school being indicated. So as a summary, my Holocaust life, my father goes off to the army and he survives. The gendarmes come to deport us and we escape. And the Nazis occupy France and we escape. I'm separated from my parents and we are reunited. In conclusion, I say with deep gratitude that it is thanks to rescuers who risked their own security and their lives by refusing to be perpetrators, collaborators, or just idle bystanders that I, a Holocaust survivor, am here today to tell my story. And we did publish our stories, 52 of us, How We Survived, which is available at the Museum of the Holocaust and the Museum of Tolerance. Finally, I want to point out that Pastor Niemöller is noted for having said, first they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up. This was taken at the Women's March in 2017. In America in 2017, they came for Muslims, and I spoke up and will continue to speak up because I'm a Jew who remembers. Very important lesson to have learned. The anthem of today, written and sung by Pete Seeger, quite early morning, should be our anthem of the day. Michael?
Though it's darkest before the dawn, this thought keeps me moving on. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention. We are back here in Los Angeles with the skyline. Thank you for your very kind attention. And if there's time, I'll certainly entertain some questions.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions. Let's see. The first question is, was it difficult to get out of Paris when you left?
It was because by then the Germans were occupying it, and so it was not the easiest thing. We just made it. I'm sure that at this point, each day algebraically increased in the dangers of trying to escape from Paris. Good question.
Thank you. How did your parents explain to you as a child that you were going to the United States?
I'm sorry, the first word, how?
Yeah, how did they explain to you as a child that you...
It's very interesting. And I'm glad that question came up because in our case, there was an announcement. The Jewish newspapers, the I can't remember, the JTA published a news article in January of 1943 that this program was established. And the Joint Distribution Committee and the Hayas, through the grapevine, made it known to people in Spain that that this program was available free of charge to anyone who wanted. So they explained to my parents explained to me that this was a way for us to get out of Europe to safety, but it was children only, so that they would send me off to New York City to be with my aunt and uncle, and that they, my parents, would join us very shortly. Of course, again, it was their optimism and their manner of presenting it that put me at ease. It, it didn't make me any happier, but it at least uh, I was able to cope with the situation better, and just simply kept thinking about and saying to them, when you come here, we'll all be together. So it was a very optimistic approach. They were always very optimistic with me, um, realistic but optimistic in attitude. And I want to point out that this is in great contrast with what is going on in, say, at the border of Mexico with California and Texas, where children are being separated from their parents abruptly on a moment's notice, if any notice at all, without the knowledge of where the parents are going or where the children are going. In my case, I was always in contact with my parents by mail. I knew where they knew where I was, and it was all planned, planned to the point where we had the choice. And twice before, they turned that down and finally did accept that choice. Very different from abruptly being separated. It was planned. It was uh, certainly much easier for all of us to cope than what is going on today. Thank you.
Thank you. Why did the German army occupy all of France in 1942? Had Vichy somehow failed the Nazis as collaborators?
Well, it's a very good question. There have been, I have seen articles written about how the German army wanted to not stop at the Pyrenees, but occupy Spain and Portugal as well. The reason that they stopped in 1940, where they did, was so that they could allocate troops to the Eastern Front, that where they were very, very much in need. So that having to occupy all of France made for a decrease in the availabilities of personnel to fight on the Eastern Front. By 1942, certainly Vichy was a puppet government and not really carrying out enthusiastically whatever it was that the Third Reich was demanding, though Jews were being deported from France from 1940 to 1942, northern part of France. I'm not sure the details, but I'm willing to bet that at this point, the Germans had very different plans than allowing the French government its, shall we say, its ability to make decisions more or less independently, still supervised by the Third Reich. In effect, it really made a big difference in that occupying southern France became that region became terrorized by the German armies and activated the Maquis, the French underground, into action, so that whatever had been going on against the Germans in northern France now was really accelerating in southern France. The underground was extremely active from 1942 to 1944.
Thank you, Henry. Um, moving forward a little bit, what high school did you attend in Los Angeles?
I graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in East Los Angeles, well, actually in El Sereno. When we first moved to Los Angeles, we lived in South Central around Vermont and Slauson. And so I attended George Washington High School for a couple of months before we moved to City Terrace. But yeah, I graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1951.
Thank you, Henry. And then actually moving backwards again, what was your education like in France?
Well, it was relatively brief in that in my education really started, as I pointed out, in Paris, and I learned some basic skills, reading and writing, at a very early age in that school in Paris on Rue Beaubourg, not far from City Hall. And in southern France, for the next 2 years, I really got a very good education. I remember it very well. I learned a lot of skills. And in addition, my parents hired a high school student to teach me to play the violin. So I thought I had a very good early education, especially considering the conditions under which we were living at the time.
Thank you, Henry. We have a comment here from a fellow child survivor who says, "You were lucky since many of the children had no idea where our parents went or when. Mine never survived. Even then, we were taken away without knowing anything. Parents' greatest sacrifice, in my opinion."
Yep. Even though I said earlier that we agree we do not have a metric to measure the degree of stress and suffering, clearly my parents and I survived. So that's certainly one indicator that my degree of stress was certainly much less than someone who lost their parents either in the camps or in other ways during the war. And the real points of stress, if you will, was that morning in August when the French gendarmes were knocking on our door, and the other was when we crossed the Pyrenees on foot. Of course, leaving my parents in Barcelona was a very stressful situation. But those are really the 3 points, if you will, of any degree of stress. Obviously, the anxiety continued until 1946 when we were reunited, but in fact, the um, uh, the amount of stress was certainly much less than someone, for example, who experienced hunger, which we did not, and the continual harassment of occupying forces, like being in an occupied area of Europe, which we were not, except for just a couple of weeks in not even a couple of weeks, so about a week or so in northern France, in Paris. So my degree of stress was very limited. And the other thing is, very honestly, my parents did protect me from those stressors and were very instrumental in my having a very positive attitude and being optimistic about outcomes, which I am to this day. Uh, so that it, it's based in reality, and I do, of course, recognize that my sibling survivors, had many more stressful situations than I, uh, given their experiences.
Thank you, Henry. Let's see. How were you able to stay in touch with the boys from the boat once you all scattered across the United States?
That's a very interesting question. I was not able to, and for decades had no way of corresponding with them or even knowing where they lived or that they were alive. Uh, Iris Posner, who created the organization you saw on one of the slides, OTC, the 1,000 children, she and a fellow social worker who had been researchers for the National Institutes of Mental Health in Washington, D.C., went to see the movie um, uh, Mark, uh, Mark, Mark's film uh, about the Kindertransport. Remind me of the name. I'm blanking right now. Um,
Which film?
the film about the Kindertransport.
Oh, but I was
Into the Arms of Strangers. And they went to see that film, and when they came out, they discussed it, and one said to the other, um, "Why didn't America do anything about bringing children over?" And being researchers, they looked it up and found our program, the program that the Joint Distribution Committee and the Hayas, uh, under Eleanor Roosevelt's leadership, implemented in saving Jewish children. Small as it was modeled after the Kindertransport program, and it was children only. But there was a significant number. They say, if you take into consideration children in the 30s from Germany and Austria included, that there were something like 1,200 to 1,500 who came to America, both in the 30s and during the war in the 40s. Um, there was a significant program, significant even if it only was limited to, if you will, one survivor. Uh, so when that group was formed, Iris sent us. She somehow contacted us. How she came up with the list, I'm not exactly clear. Although the Joint Distribution Committee did have our names and our ages and information about us. But one day I received an email from Iris saying, were you one of the children who came to the United States in 1943 from Spain? And I immediately responded, and we've been in contact ever since. And then um, it's interesting. Again, thanks to Iris and her mailing list, I was able to contact and in fact met with children who were part of the OTC when we had a conference in Chicago, and at which I presented my story in part. And we met a couple of times. The organization is now no longer functioning, and all the records are in a museum in New York City. But documents are available, and of course, in this age of computers, it's relatively easy to follow the trail and to reach each and every one of us. Uh, the last one that I got in touch with, Claude Gans, who's the kid that was in that picture, was on my right. Uh, he's just published a book last year, and when Amazon, when advertising the book, writes his biography, an abbreviated biography in French, and then it ends off by saying, if you want to contact the author, here's his email address. So I immediately emailed him, and we reestablished contact as well. But and then the others I knew about because they were, for example, a brother and sister were in the older kids were in Montreal, Canada. Uh, he died since, and she had gone back to France. The others are more difficult to reach. I know that one of the girls, especially the girls, because they changed their names, of course, but one of the girls is in Israel. I have not been able to make contact with her because I don't have that contact address, but I will certainly follow up because uh, they are, after all, siblings and or fellow travelers, if you will. But I'm very fortunate, and I was blessed with a very, very good memory for a lot of these details. And as I present my material, as I speak my story, I am visualizing those moments and remembering them very clearly, so that I've even had the experience where someone asks me a question about one of those times, and I'm thinking, yes, I remember, and it was on the right or it was on the left where we went and so on. So that um, I remember each and every day of crossing the Pyrenees on foot. For me, it was a hike, an overnight uh, experience that was a very positive. Of course, for my parents, it was very, very different. They realizing the dangers, I not so. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. One of our audience members says that she thinks her parents were close friends with your parents and that they came on the same ship from Europe. Her parents were Leon and Hadassah Grimberg. Do you
Oh
remember
yes,
them?
yes, I know. I remember they went to Mexico.
Yes, that's what she says. They stayed in Mexico,
Yep.
and she
Yeah,
remembers your.
right. Oh yes. Is she the social worker? Is that no, her husband was a social worker. That's the person you're talking about.
Yes.
And if she wants, I would love for her to get in touch with us. Michael, if you can facilitate that, that would be great.
I can certainly facilitate this.
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is what happens. You see,
One more.
this is you got these contacts constantly coming up. Yeah, go ahead.
One of our audience members would like to know how you are so young, healthy, and spry.
Well, it's a question I'm asked often because I know my parents were very young looking. My dad lived to be 97. My mother lived to be 100, and they did not look that age. So my lesson that I learned early on is choose your parents wisely. That's the lesson. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of those components that's largely genetic. Um, I'm an environmentalist as a behaviorist professionally, but I do adhere to the formula that certain things are genetically transmitted, whether it's eye color or longevity. Thank you.
Thank you for the advice. I will keep it in mind. How did you come to host the disability program on KPFK?
Right. When? 35 years ago.
And so how did that come about? And if you could please
Oh,
explain it to the audience, that would be
sure.
great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I I was my wife and I were charter subscribers to KPFK, FM radio station of the Pacifica Foundation. That was the beginning of a non-commercial network. It began as KPFA in Berkeley in 1949 and then started in 1959. Carol and I were charter subscribers even before we had an FM radio. So we were subscribers and we weren't able to listen to the station until we finally bought a cable radio that had FM. I got that interest because my research interest as a behaviorist was to work with individuals who had had neurological damage, brain injury, as a result of some vehicular accident or some other. And I did research in which we rehabilitated or retrained lost motor functions, hand movements, foot movement, walking, and so on. And so I became very interested in the area of disabilities. And one of the hosts on KPFK, Mario Casetta, who was for years in charge of the folk music programs, had a stroke one time. We were friends, and I visited him at the hospital. And I said to him, you know, there should be a radio program on KPFK having to do with disabilities. And he said, that's a great idea. And he got out of the hospital, and within 2 weeks, we had an offer to do a radio program once a week. And the original title was Challenge with an exclamation mark. And then we changed that to our our only other name of well, that's good. Now I'm blanking on it. Um, I'll think of it if I have a few more moments. Ability. Let's see. I can't think of it. I can't. Accessibility. Disability. No, accessibility. Now, no. Welcome to Access Unlimited. There we go. Access Unlimited. That took a little while. And that came from one of our listeners. We had a contest to rename the program, and that was the winning selection. So we changed that. We discontinued that program, or it was discontinued this last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. And I think a good question to conclude with is how can we resist the disease of racism
Oh
and
boy.
bigotry forms?
Yeah. There, every group has its distinction between in and out, those who are members and those who are outsiders. And we always suspect the outsider, the one who is different. And it becomes very quickly the one who is different is less than. So I'm better than you, the stranger, the different one. And it doesn't take very much for people who are in power to capitalize on that and play on our disabilities, on our bigotry, on our shortness of understanding, and to say, no, I'm better than you, whether I'm a member of this group, uh, whether it's racial, religious, you know, tall people versus short people, or whatever. And it's very easy to distinguish. So that there's racism, which obviously has economic basis as well as political ramifications. Uh, it's a way that people can control you or make you victimized. And Unfortunately, none of us is immune to it. We have to work at accepting the stranger, accepting the different one. Doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. And, the first thing people ask you if you have a new friend uh, is something to indicate that that person maybe maybe should be suspected of something. I remember one of the jokes that we used to tell way back when was about the child who came home, uh, I don't know, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, coming home from school one day and saying that he just met a new kid at school, and his name is whatever, Tom, and very nice kid. He says, oh, um, parents ask, well, tell me about him. And he starts describing, and he says, does he have short, very curly, kinky hair? Is his skin dark? So the kid says, I don't know. When I see him tomorrow, I'll look. Uh, Kids often do not notice. And of course, remember in South Pacific, the song, you have to be carefully taught. And people do that. They carefully teach us. Uh, and the museum, on a note to end on, the museum works very hard to teach people that the lessons of bigotry, the lessons of racism, of sexism, all the other isms that we've labeled uh, end up being vehicles for what happened in the Holocaust, because it can happen again and it can happen to anybody. And we have to be on our guard. We have to work hard to establish positive relations.
Thank you so much again, Henry, for sharing your story with us. And yes, as you said, this is part of our mission, and that's why we're so grateful to have you as a member of our community. You would come to the museum to speak in person frequently, and now that we're doing it virtually, you're doing this as well online. And we're so grateful for that and for everything you do for our future generations. So we couldn't do what we do without you and our other volunteers. So again, thank you so much. And to our audience, we thank you so much for tuning in. And as a reminder, you can follow our website and our Facebook page to see our regular virtual programs. We have Holocaust survivors speak every Thursday at 11 o'clock. A week from today, on October 22nd, we have Bill Harvey speaking, a survivor from Czechoslovakia. So we hope you tune in then as well. Meantime, we wish everybody a happy, healthy, and safe weekend, and we hope to welcome you to the museum in person at some point. But in the meantime, please continue to follow us online. Thank you, everybody, and thank you once again, Henry.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.